Hello CS112. Today I will be going over Lab 14, which is def sum strings, which had to do with trying to set blocks, which happens to also be your last lab. So I just paraphrased the instructions are up here, so I'm just going to dive right into it. So given a variable number of strings representing integer values or float values, you are to find the sum of all the integer values while subtracting the truncated values along the way, or the truncated float values along the way. If the value is neither an integer nor a float, to throw a value error exception, which your GTA said you can just print the string or return the string that says value error exception. So as you can see down here, I already have the test cases from the PDF typed up here. And here you're given all ints, so you simply just add them together and you get 2. Here you have a mix of integers and floats as well, and you need to find the truncated version of this, which means if you take 4.2, for instance, you are just going to subtract 4. If it's 4.9, you would still subtract 4 because we are looking for the truncated version. We're not doing any rounding here. Anyways, the output should be 28. And let's say the person giving us the arguments doesn't know what a number is and they put Mason in. You should output a string that says value error exception. Now, while reading this up here, you should see variable number of strings and immediately know this should be automatic from you guys. That this should be your parameter. This all args is saying is like, hello, I can take any amount of parameters or arguments that you pass to me, and I can act as a container for them, and where every argument is going to be an element inside of it. So we can simply do for args and use it like a normal list. Before I dive into this lab was this lab did catch me off guard because some of the GTA said you can use if statements and the others said you cannot. So I will show you a solution using both. In my opinion, not using if statements is slightly trickier, but I will still show you solutions for both regardless, and that will be later on in the video. So if you want to skip ahead to that, I will leave a timestamp down below in the description. So now this is with if statements, the easier way that I'm about to solve. So the very first thing I want to do, because I am solving for the sum, is create some sort of variable that I can start adding to. When I was originally doing try and accept, I would like to pretend I would always have perfect output at first to solve for my try block. So for now, all I need to do is total plus equals I. And I'm going to, outside of the for loop, I'm going to return total, and let's see what happens. Boom, I should get 2. And I have, yes, my first error here. So I is a string, and I can't say 0 plus a string. That makes no sense, so I need to cast it to an integer. It's a rookie mistake right there, but now it should output 2, as there it did. So we know that's down. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there. Actually, I'll leave it there. Now I'm going to test this bad boy out, which has both strings and integers. So I need to try to account for that in my code here. So the number one way I saw to do this is simply checking with an if statement, of course, if there is a period or a decimal point within the number, because that means, this obviously means that it has to be a float. So if a decimal is in I, you can simply say total minus equals. I'm going to do this all in one line. The easiest way to do this is just say int I, right? Because we have to cast to an int. I'll tell you why this is not going to work in a couple minutes or in a couple seconds when we actually get there. And else, let's say we're given a string representation of an integer. We're just going to do what we did before, total plus equals I. So I need to cast this to an int, obviously. So now let's run this bad boy. Here we go. Value error, our first value error. That's odd because we were only supposed to get a value error if there was Mason here. That is not true because the built-in int function, it can only accept 2 possible things to make it to an int. One of those being a string representation of an integer like this, like I just highlighted here, or an actual float. So not this, but let's say we had an actual float like that. That is fine. Ints can work on this. But if we have a string representation of a float, it will give you a value error because ints cannot do that. So the easiest way you can do this all on one line is by simply casting it to a float first. So you can cast I to a float, and then it will become an int. So for instance, if we're iterating through and we get to 4.2, 4.2 is going to be in here. So we'll have the string 4.2 where I is. So let's put a string 4.2. The very first thing that will happen is the float function will be called on this, which will work because it is a string representation of a float. And then we will be working with this, the int version of 4.2. And what is that? That is 4, and we're subtracting it to the total. So again, all you got to do is this. And total plus equals I, blah, blah, blah. This is what we had in the first place. And boom. Okay, 2 and 28. The two things we're expecting, 2 and 28. So now this is how we're handling everything, right? We're actually getting real outputs rather than a string that's screaming exception. So this is all going to go inside our try block. So I'm going to highlight this and press tab and move it in a bit. And I'm going to place it within a try block, which means we're going to need an accept block. So what is our accept block going to say? It's going to handle if any error pops up here. If any error is to pop up here, it will go immediately to this accept block. We are guaranteed that there is only one error that we're really trying to catch, so this should be pretty fairly easy. We don't have to specify what type of error we're throwing here. So we're simply just returning a string that says value error exception. I think I spelled those right. So now let's take this final test case here, and I'm just going to pop it right below there. Let's see if we get the 3 outputs we want. I want 2, I want 28, and I want a string that says value error exception. Let's run that bad boy, and here we go. Beautiful. So now I'm just going to dive right into how to solve this without if-else statements, which is going to require me to delete almost all my code. Actually, not all my code. I'm just going to, there we go. All my code. So the very first thing I'm going to do, of course, is, as you remember, we solved the try block before. The try block is simply going to be, though, it's not going to be, it's not going to have 2 elements to it. It's not going to have 2 an if and an else. It's just going to have total plus equals the int I. The reason I can't put the subtraction up here is because, remember, when I do this, it's going to throw an error. It's going to throw an error. Because we cannot cast a float representation of a string like 4.2 to an int. That is not how the built-in function of int works. So I'm going to have a except for that. Except it was throwing a value error before. So I'm going to say except value error. So this right here is handling if we were to get this number right here. If we were to get 4.2. What do we want to do with that? We want to actually keep this number, right? We want to try to work with it. However, when we get to value error here, we don't know if it's going to be the string representation of a float or just straight up invalid input. So what I'm going to do here is have another try and accept within this this accept block. So I'm going to try, the first thing I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to total minus equals the int float, which, as I explained before, this is going to give you the truncated version of this. It's just going to return 4 because first it's going to cast it to a float, which the int can then convert to, the int operation can then convert to an integer, and I'm going to subtract it from the total. However, if this is a word like Mason, like this is a string, you can't cast the word Mason into a float. That makes no sense. So we're going to get another error, which I'm going to handle here. I honestly have no idea what just happened. So Control Z right there. That was bizarre. Okay, and I'm simply going to return right here value error exception. Let's pretend that's how you spell exception, and let's see if I get the same 3 outputs. I do not, because what is it here? Because this is not a word, run. It's actually return. Or not. And I should, yeah, so no syntax errors. Obviously, I need to test my code by uncommenting the test cases. Silly little me. And so I'm getting here. None, and value exception, or however I spelled that, because I am not returning my total anymore, which I need to do outside my for loop. And that should give me the expected output. Boom, it does. So again, those are 2 quick solutions on how to do either the with if statements or without. If you have any questions, let me know.